When an immigrant arrives in a new country, it's incredibly important that they obey the local laws and that they try to adapt and integrate into their new society. That's what I do when I'm traveling internationally. I mean, the last thing I want to do is end up in trouble because I was unaware of some local law. Well, Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is actually making it more difficult for newcomers to understand what is expected of them here in Canada. A new version of Discover Canada is in the works, and according to a leaked draft, the Trudeau government will be making sweeping changes to this citizenship guide given to all newcomers. The current guide tells newcomers in no uncertain terms that barbaric cultural practices are not tolerated in Canada. The guide reads, and I quote, "Canada's openness and generosity do not extend to barbaric cultural practices that tolerate spousal abuse, honor killings, female genital mutilation, forced marriage, or other gender-based violence," unquote. But according to reports, the Trudeau government is now removing this warning from the guide. It removes any mention of barbaric cultural practices whatsoever. This was to be expected, given Trudeau's long opposition to using the word barbaric to describe practices like female genital mutilation and so-called honor killings. Back in 2011, as the liberal immigration critic, Justin Trudeau said that using these terms was pejorative, overly judgmental, and that the government should make an attempt at responsible neutrality. Apparently, we wouldn't want to offend people who beat their wives, mutilate young girls, and who kill female members of their own family. Now, Trudeau initially doubled down on his aversion to the word barbaric, saying he'd made a similar claim in 2009, but then only after significant blowback from Canadians, Trudeau finally apologized for his comment. He said, quote, "All violence against women is barbaric. If my concerns about language led some to think otherwise, then I gladly apologize," unquote. Notice how he inserted some cultural relativism in there, saying that all violence is barbaric, and equating violence amongst Canadians, which is far less prevalent and punished severely, to places like Somalia, where 98% of girls have their vaginas brutally mutilated. The reality is that in many parts of the world, including places where we accept immigrants and refugees from, there is no fundamental respect for individual rights and freedoms, and that's especially true for women. Many newcomers to the West come from places where barbaric cultural practices are a way of life, and many are bringing these practices to Canada with them. For example, recent investigations by Global News and the Toronto Star have helped to shine light on a growing problem of female genital mutilation, or FGM, on young Canadian girls. According to federal documents, the government is aware that Canadian girls are being taken abroad to be subjected to this painful practice that cuts out a part of their vagina. They even have a term for this. They call it vacation cutting. And that's not the only concern Canadian officials have when it comes to FGM in Canada. An internal report from the Canadian Border Services Agency reveals border officers have been put on alert to watch out for practitioners of FGM entering Canada. Border agents have been given photos of cutting tools, belts, and special herbs carried by practitioners so that our officials can be on the lookout and stop them from importing this barbaric practice into Canada. The report also says that razor blades, shards of glass, strips for binding legs, as well as ash, oil, and herbal mixtures are carried and used for FGM. Now, the United Nations estimates that this barbaric procedure is practiced today in 30 countries and has been carried out on some 200 million girls worldwide. We can't ignore this disturbing and unwanted practice, and we can't deny that it's made its way to the West. We must acknowledge this fact and be clear that practices like FGM have no place in Canadian society. We should be unequivocal in protecting the rights and freedoms of girls and women in Canada, and dedicating to ensuring that cultural violence is not ever imported into Canada through immigration. Instead, Justin Trudeau is putting political correctness ahead of Canadian values and traditions. Trudeau loves to talk about how he's a feminist, but his virtue signaling means absolutely nothing if he's unwilling to stand up for girls and women in Canada who are the victims of cultural violence. Instead of repeating that he's a feminist, Trudeau should repeat that men and women have equal rights and receive equal protection here in Canada, regardless of your religion and your culture. He should be going into cultural communities. He should be going into mosques and repeating that message. And we should never be neutral when it comes to barbaric cultural practices in Canada. For the Rebel Media, I'm Candace Malcolm. Thanks so much for watching. We are trying to build a mobile app. Please support us by visiting theycan'tstopus.com.